You know, usually when we talk about a legal judgment, there's like this expectation of clinical precision.
Right? Yeah, it feels like engineering.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the light box, and the doctor just points and says, well, there it is.
It's binary. Broken or not broken. You violated the statute, and here's the physical evidence.
Mhm.
We find a lot of comfort in that kind of neat categorization.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of complex digital networks, algorithms, and, subjective intent.
Oh, and suddenly that X-ray machine just starts completely malfunctioning.
Totally. We end up looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, honestly, it's murky.
Very murky.
And there is no better example of these murky waters than the stack of documents we're exploring for you today in this deep dive.
Yeah, these are AI-generated analytical summaries of a highly unusual legal defense.
Right, the one known as Dr. Chen Jingyuan's blood letter from prison.
The premise of this case is just, it's extraordinary. Dr. Chen is a scholar who found himself charged with the crime of picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Which is such a broad charge. But specifically, the allegation was that he was knowingly spreading rumors online. Yeah.
Exactly. Rumors that allegedly resulted in a severe disruption of public order. And all of this was based entirely on him retweeting posts on Twitter, which is, now X.
But, like, instead of hiring a standard lawyer to argue about free speech precedents or jurisdictional technicalities, he did something wild.
He really did. He weaponized the hard sciences.
Yeah, he used cutting-edge theoretical physics, high-level mathematics, and the philosophy of logic to just completely dismantle the charges against him.
It's fascinating. But before we get into the actual mechanics of how he pulled that off,
Yeah.
it is crucial we establish the boundaries of our discussion for you.
Right, the impartiality disclaimer.
Yes, because the sources you've shared deal with a highly polarized case involving an individual dissident and a state judicial system. We need to be clear right up front.
We are strictly neutral observers here.
Exactly. We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the political actions, or the judicial decisions contained in this material.
Yeah, our goal today is simply to unpack the fascinating intellectual arguments and the scientific concepts Dr. Chen used to build his defense.
Nothing more, nothing less. So, to understand this defense, we really have to start at the very foundation of the charge.
Which was that the prosecution claimed Dr. Chen knowingly spread falsehoods.
Right. But how does a court mathematically or logically prove what someone knows to be absolutely true or false?
Which takes us right out of the courtroom and into the realm of pure logic.
It does. And this is where Dr. Chen introduces his first major theoretical tool, which is Gödel's incompleteness theorems.
Okay, so for anyone who hasn't taken high-level theoretical math recently,
Which is most of us.
right, yeah, the simplest way to visualize Gödel's concept is to imagine trying to lift yourself off the ground by, like, pulling up on your own bootstraps.
You physically cannot do it.
Exactly. Kurt Gödel proved mathematically in 1931 that any sufficiently complex logical system has a fundamental limit.
It cannot be both complete and consistent at the same time.
Right, meaning a system cannot prove its own absolute consistency from the inside. There will always be true statements within that system that the system itself simply cannot prove.
And what's brilliant here is how Dr. Chen applied this highly abstract mathematical theorem to the everyday legal charge of knowingly spreading false information.
How do you make that leap?
Well, he argued from a stance of what he called epistemic humility. The mechanism of his argument was basically this.
Okay.
Since all human knowledge systems are inherently incomplete, as Gödel proved, no single human being can absolutely know that a complex political, historical, or academic claim is entirely true or entirely false.
Oh, wow. So by that logic, he viewed his retweets not as the act of knowingly spreading lies,
Right.
but simply as sharing academic texts for open, skeptical discussion.
Exactly. He argued that he maintains a critical attitude toward all knowledge, which is, what scholars are supposed to do.
And he turned this limitation back onto the judicial system itself, didn't he?
He did. By claiming it possessed the absolute, indisputable truth regarding what is and isn't a rumor, the court was basically acting like a closed, formal system.
Which Gödel says is impossible.
Right. According to Gödel's second theorem, any system that tries to self-certify its absolute correctness from within is fundamentally flawed. It inevitably becomes incomplete and inconsistent.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
Isn't that taking theoretical math, like, a bit too far into the real world? The law doesn't actually require absolute mathematical certainty.
That's true.
It operates on practical certainty, right? Like the reasonable person standard. If I yell fire in a crowded theater and cause a panic, I can't just quote Gödel to the judge.
No, you can't.
I can't just say, well, Your Honor, since human knowledge is incomplete, we can't truly know what fire is.
That is a very sharp pushback. And the sources actually point out this exact limitation in his defense.
Oh, they do?
Yeah. Gödel's theorems apply strictly to formal mathematical and logical systems. They do not apply to everyday empirical facts.
Because whether a theater is burning is a physical fact, not a mathematical axiom.
Exactly. You cannot use formal logic to deny the empirical reality of a burning building.
Right. That makes total sense.
But the sources highlight the broader, far more crucial philosophical point Dr. Chen was making here.
Which is what?
Well, while the math might not perfectly map to a burning building, it perfectly maps to the danger of a legal system criminalizing intellectual skepticism.
Oh, I see.
When a centralized legal entity declares itself the sole, unquestionable arbiter of absolute truth on complex theoretical or political issues, it oversteps the boundaries of human knowledge.
So his use of Gödel was basically a plea for cognitive humility within the justice system itself.
Precisely. It's a warning against prosecuting the act of thinking.
Okay, that makes total sense. But let's say the court ignores the philosophy of truth. The defense still has to tackle the physical outcome of the charge, right?
The severe public order disruption.
Exactly. Rumor. The prosecution still has to prove that his specific retweets actually caused that disruption.
Right. The causal link.
Yeah, how do you prove digital cause and effect?
To dismantle that, the sources show Dr. Chen relying on two core theories from the philosophy of causality.
Okay, what are they?
David Hume's regularity theory and David Lewis's counterfactual theory.
All right, let's start with David Hume. Hume had this idea of constant conjunction.
Which means what exactly?
Well, the mechanism is pretty straightforward. If event A causes event B, then in our empirical experience, A must always reliably precede B.
Okay.
Like you drop an apple, it falls to the ground, drop, fall. It's a constant observable rule.
Got it. So applying Hume to this digital case, we have to look for that empirical regularity.
Right, and what did his metrics show?
The sources note that Dr. Chen had fewer than 100 followers on this platform.
Fewer than 100.
Yeah. And a large portion of those were inactive bot accounts. His historical interaction rate, like likes, replies, secondary retweets, was almost zero.
Oh, wow. Which means, under Hume's theory, the prosecution would have to prove there is a constant, observable rule in the universe.
A rule that says what?
That a retweet by a tiny, inactive account with zero engagement constantly and reliably leads to severe societal chaos.
And empirically, no such rule exists. Millions of tiny accounts retweet things every second without causing societal collapse.
So to claim Dr. Chen's retweet caused the disruption just because it happened before the disruption.
That is the classic post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. Just because the rooster crows before the sun rises doesn't mean the rooster's cry caused the sun to rise.
Exactly. Okay, so Hume's constant conjunction fails. But what about David Lewis's counterfactual theory? How does that work?
Lewis's theory is essentially the but-for test used in law, but framed as an exercise in parallel universes.
Parallel universes. I like where this is going.
Right. So I want you to imagine a counterfactual world, a parallel timeline, where Dr. Chen never woke up that day.
Okay.
He never opened the app, and he never retweeted those posts. Now, based on his metrics, we asked the critical question.
Which is?
In that parallel universe, would the alleged severe public order disruption have been avoided?
Well, considering his audience was essentially a handful of silent bots, no. The world would look exactly the same.
Exactly. The disruption would have happened anyway because nobody was looking at his feed to begin with.
Which logically means his actions were not a necessary condition for the alleged chaos.
Right. Under both Hume's empiricism and Lewis's counterfactuals, the causal chain the prosecution relied on completely collapses.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here, because the internet is weird.
It is very weird.
What about the butterfly effect? The idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil sets off a tornado in Texas.
Okay.
Sure, Dr. Chen is just one guy with 100 followers. But isn't it theoretically possible that his one retweet happened to be seen by the right person?
Who shared it with a bigger person.
Exactly. Starting a chain reaction that ultimately crashes the system, like dominoes standing in a perfect line.
That is the exact question that drove Dr. Chen to abandon abstract philosophy and shift his defense entirely into hard network science.
Oh, interesting.
To understand why the butterfly effect doesn't apply to social media, We have to look at how these platforms are structurally engineered. Twitter, or X, is not a random web where all nodes are equal.
Right.
It is what physicists call a scale-free network.
And scale-free networks operate on a power law distribution. They are highly, extremely unequal.
Tremendously unequal.
Yeah.
In a scale-free network, you have a tiny fraction of hub nodes.
These are the massive media conglomerates, pop stars, and politicians with tens of millions of connections.
Exactly. And then you have the vast, overwhelming majority of users who are peripheral nodes. They have almost zero influence on the network shape.
And Dr. Chen mathematically proved he was a peripheral node.
He did.
You know, I think the best way to visualize this isn't dominoes, but like the global airline network.
Well, that's a great analogy.
If you shut down a dirt runway in a tiny village in rural Nebraska, global aviation doesn't even blink. The system doesn't care.
Right.
But if a blizzard completely shuts down the massive hubs in Atlanta or Dubai, the entire global travel system cascades into failure.
And Dr. Chen was arguing that mathematically he was the dirt runway.
Exactly.
And because of this unequal structure, scale-free networks possess extreme robustness against random failures. The defense actually cited physicist Reuven Cohen's critical threshold formula.
Okay, what does that formula prove?
Cohen mathematically demonstrated that you could randomly wipe out almost all of the peripheral nodes, the dirt runways, and the macrostructure of the network would still function perfectly.
So removing Dr. Chen or analyzing his tiny level activity means mathematically nothing to the overall integrity of the network. But what if the chaos wasn't about breaking the physical structure of the network, but about the informational chaos on the platform itself?
Dr. Chen addressed that too by bringing in the CAP theorem from distributed computer science.
The CAP theorem.
Right. It states that a global server system cannot simultaneously guarantee three things: perfect consistency, perfect availability, and perfect partition tolerance.
You are mathematically forced to pick two and sacrifice the third.
Exactly.
Okay, let's break that down for everyone. Partition tolerance means the system doesn't crash if a communication line between servers drops.
Right.
And availability means every user who clicks the app gets a response, even if it's slightly outdated.
And massive social networks have to prioritize those two just to keep the site online for billions of people.
Which means they deliberately sacrifice perfect consistency.
Yes, everyone's timeline is slightly different, slightly out of sync, slightly messy.
This proves that a certain level of informational chaos is not a crime. It is the natural, mathematically built-in state of a global distributed network.
It's a feature of the engineering. You cannot legally blame a single peripheral node for a systemic reality that the engineers designed on purpose.
Okay, so if he mathematically couldn't break the structure and the system is designed to be chaotic, the prosecution's entire reality is broken.
It really is.
But the avalanche did happen. The severe public disruption did occur. If his retweet couldn't structurally cause it, how did the information spread?
Could his specific tweet somehow bypass the structure and go viral anyway?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that leads us to the final and perhaps most brilliant piece of his scientific defense: the math of avalanches.
Okay.
We're stepping into the physics of self-organized criticality.
Imagine you are slowly dropping sand onto a table, one grain at a time. It forms a little pile.
Right.
As you keep adding sand, the pile gets steeper and steeper until it reaches what physicists call a critical state.
And at that point, the pile is so precarious that adding just one more single grain of sand could do absolutely nothing.
Or it could trigger a massive avalanche that collapses the entire pile.
Exactly. And in network science, the spread of a viral post, that potential avalanche, is modeled using a mathematical framework called the Galton-Watson branching process.
Galton-Watson. Got it.
And the single most important parameter in this entire model is represented by the letter M.
Think of M kind of like the R0 value in epidemiology, right? The infection rate.
Basically, yeah. And M stands for the average number of new retweets directly generated by a single retweet.
So if your M value is greater than 1, the information spreads exponentially. That's your viral avalanche.
Right. If M is exactly 1, the system is critical and unpredictable.
But if your M value is less than 1, the fire starves itself of oxygen. The cascade dies out. It's in a subcritical state.
And the sources take Dr. Chen's actual platform metrics, again, fewer than 100 followers, mostly bots, virtually zero historical interaction, and they calculate his specific M value.
Okay, well, what's it?
It comes out to M equals 0.12.
0.12. That is not just below 1. That is astronomically low.
It places his account in what physicists call a deep subcritical regime.
And what does that mean practically?
According to the Galton-Watson extinction theorem, When a system is in a deep subcritical regime, the probability of an information cascade completely dying out is mathematically 1.
Wait, really? So mathematically, it's not just highly unlikely that his retweet caused an avalanche. It's an actual, provable, zero probability event.
Yes, absolute, 100% certainty. The statistical models in the sources show that 95% of the time, an information cascade originating from an account with an M-value of 0.12 will stop entirely at just 3 total retweets.
Wow.
It is physically and mathematically impossible for a node with that specific parameter to independently trigger a systemic viral avalanche.
But the avalanche did happen. The public order was severely disrupted.
It was.
If Dr. Chen's grain of sand had a zero probability of causing it, who did?
This is where Dr. Chen flips the entire prosecution's argument on its head.
How so?
For a massive avalanche to occur from any single retweet, the entire social system must already be in a highly unstable supercritical state.
So the sand pile must already be engineered to the absolute brink of collapse.
Precisely.
Oh, wow. So he argued that if the system truly is that incredibly fragile, the real threat isn't the single peripheral user dropping one grain of sand onto the pile?
Exactly. The true threat, the actual root cause of the instability, comes from the hub nodes.
The massive, powerful media institutions, the platform algorithms.
Yeah, and the systemic forces that built the sand pile so precariously high in the first place.
That makes total sense.
If a societal system is so inherently unstable that a 100-follower bot-filled account can supposedly crash it, the system itself is the hazard. Blaming Dr. Chen is like blaming the dirt runway for the blizzard in Atlanta.
That is an absolutely staggering intellectual pivot. Let's just summarize what he achieved here, because it's brilliant.
He really is.
Dr. Chen took a vague, subjective legal charge like picking quarrels and provoking trouble, and dismantled it across 4 different scientific disciplines.
Right. He used Gödel's epistemology to show the arrogance of demanding absolute truth.
He used Hume and Lewis's philosophy of causality to prove there was no empirical link.
He used Reuven Cohen's network robustness and the CIP theorem to prove his structural insignificance.
And finally, he used the Galton-Watson branching process to mathematically prove that him starting a viral avalanche was a zero probability event.
It is a profound demonstration of using the rigorous, undeniable laws of physics and mathematics to confront the subjective, often murky interpretations of the law.
And if we connect this to you, the listener, the next time you post online, take a moment to think about your own value.
Yeah, think about where you actually sit in the massive scale-free network of the modern internet.
We all have this lingering low-level anxiety about accidentally going viral for the wrong reasons or, causing some massive stir with an ill-thought-out reply.
But the math reveals just how powerless peripheral nodes actually are.
Unless you are a massive hub, the structure of the internet is mathematically designed to absorb your noise. You are the dirt runway.
It is a strangely humbling yet comforting realization about our digital footprint. We drastically overestimate our causal impact on the network.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. Throughout this deep dive, we've seen a glaring contrast.
Yeah, a huge mismatch, really.
We are currently trying to regulate 21st century complex, nonlinear digital networks, systems governed by scale-free power laws and avalanche dynamics.
Right.
But we are trying to police them using 19th century linear legal concepts of cause and effect. We are essentially using an old, flickering X-ray machine to diagnose the flow of a digital ocean.
The tools of the traditional courtroom are simply not calibrated for the physics of the digital world.
So if the legal system fundamentally cannot comprehend the basic physics and mathematics of the networks it is desperately trying to police, can it ever truly deliver justice in the digital age?
Or are we destined to keep pointing at shadows on a broken X-ray machine, pretending we see a clean break?
Something for you to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.